What happens when someone shows you unexpected mercy in court and you have no way to respond without breaking down completely? Mr. Richardson, I'm going to do something that might surprise you today. Judge Frank Caprio's words hung in the air like a thunderbolt. The wealthy businessman sitting across from him had come prepared for a fight, armed with expensive lawyers and an attitude of entitlement. He had no idea he was about to receive a life lesson that would leave him completely speechless. What happened next would change this man's entire perspective on justice, humanity, and what it truly means to lead. It was a typical Tuesday morning in Providence Municipal Court, but nothing about this case would be typical. Robert Richardson, CEO of Richardson Industries, had walked into the courtroom with the confidence of a man who believed money could solve any problem. His $3,000 suit, platinum watch, and team of 3 lawyers sent a clear message: he wasn't going down without a fight. The charge was simple: multiple parking violations in handicapped spaces outside his downtown office building. But Richardson's attitude was anything but simple. He sat rigidly in his chair, jaw clenched, ready to battle every single citation. Judge Frank Caprio entered the courtroom with his usual warm demeanor, but his eyes immediately picked up on the tension radiating from the defendant's table. At 84 years old, Caprio had seen every type of person walk through his courtroom, but something about Richardson's defiant posture told him this would be a memorable case. But Richardson had no idea that Judge Caprio had already reviewed his file, and discovered something that would completely change the trajectory of this hearing. Mr. Richardson, Judge Caprio began, adjusting his glasses as he looked down at the paperwork. I see here you've accumulated 17 parking violations in handicapped spaces over the past 6 months. That's quite a pattern. Richardson's lead attorney immediately stood up. Your Honor, my client runs a very busy company and sometimes these parking decisions were made by employees who... Sit down, Judge Caprio said firmly but not unkindly. I want to hear from Mr. Richardson himself. Richardson rose slowly, his chest puffed out with the arrogance of someone unaccustomed to being challenged. Your Honor, these citations are ridiculous. My building's parking is extremely limited, and as the CEO, I need immediate access to... Stop right there, Judge Caprio interrupted, his voice cutting through Richardson's rehearsed excuses like a knife through butter. But what Judge Caprio said next would expose something about Richardson that no one in that courtroom, including Richardson himself, was prepared for. Mr. Richardson, before we continue, I need to ask you something. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice taking on a gentler tone. Do you have any family members with disabilities? The question hit Richardson like a physical blow. His confident posture wavered for just a moment, and those who knew him well would have recognized the flash of pain that crossed his face. That's not relevant to these citations, Your Honor, Richardson stammered, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. Actually, it is, Judge Caprio replied. Because according to the background check my office conducted, you have a 7-year-old daughter named Emma who uses a wheelchair due to spina bifida. The courtroom went dead silent. Richardson's face had gone completely white. Subscribe now and comment what you think about this confrontation, because what comes next will completely change your understanding of what true leadership looks like. Your Honor, I don't see how my daughter's condition has anything to do with... Richardson's voice cracked slightly. It has everything to do with it, Judge Caprio said, his voice now filled with a compassion that seemed to fill the entire courtroom. Because I'm looking at a man who parks in handicapped spaces 17 times, and I'm wondering how he explains that to his little girl when she can't find a parking space that she actually needs. Richardson's lawyers exchanged worried glances. This wasn't going according to plan. Their client, who had been so confident just minutes earlier, now looked like he was struggling to breathe. Mr. Richardson, when Emma grows up and needs to park in handicapped spaces, what do you want her to find? Spaces taken by people who don't need them, or the accessibility that the law provides for people like her? No one expected what happened next. Not even Judge Caprio was prepared for Richardson's reaction. Richardson's hands began to shake. The man who had walked into this courtroom ready to fight the system with his wealth and lawyers was now standing before a judge who had found the one thing money couldn't protect, his conscience. I. Richardson tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he was completely without an answer. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench and walked around to face Richardson directly. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "Mr. Richardson, I could fine you the maximum penalty for these violations. That would be $8,500. I'm sure a man of your means could write that check without thinking twice." Richardson nodded weakly, reaching for his checkbook like a reflex. "But I'm not going to do that," Judge Caprio continued, and Richardson's hand froze mid-reach. "Instead, I'm going to ask you to do something that will matter more than any fine ever could." Judge Caprio walked closer to Richardson, close enough that their conversation became almost intimate despite being in open court. "I want you to go home tonight and have dinner with Emma. I want you to ask her about the challenges she faces every day. I want you to really listen to her answers. And then I want you to come back here in 30 days and tell me what you learned." Richardson's composure finally cracked completely. Tears began forming in his eyes as the weight of what the judge was saying hit him fully. "But there's more," Judge Caprio continued. "I'm ordering you to personally install, at your own expense, 2 additional handicapped parking spaces in your building's parking lot. And I want a sign put up that reads, 'Reserved for Emma and friends.'" The businessman who had entered this courtroom ready for battle was now struggling not to break down completely. "Your Honor, I..." Richardson's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Judge Caprio replied gently. "But in 30 days, I want you to come back here and tell me what kind of father, and what kind of man, you want to be." The courtroom remained absolutely silent. Richardson's expensive lawyers sat motionless, completely unprepared for this turn of events. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving, caught up in the emotional weight of the moment. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. What he said next would stay with Richardson for the rest of his life. "Mr. Richardson, wealth and power can take you far in this world. But they can't make you a good father. They can't teach you empathy. And they certainly can't buy you the respect of a daughter who watches how you treat people like her." Richardson finally broke. The tears he had been fighting back began to flow freely. This powerful CEO, who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions daily, stood in a municipal courtroom crying like a child. "I never thought about it that way," he whispered. "I never connected. I just thought. You thought parking laws didn't apply to you because you had money," Judge Caprio finished gently. "But laws aren't about money, Mr. Richardson. They're about protecting the most vulnerable among us. People like your Emma." Richardson looked up at Judge Caprio with an expression of complete transformation. "What can I do, Your Honor? How can I fix this?" Judge Caprio smiled for the first time during the entire proceedings. "You can start by remembering that every handicapped parking space you see represents someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's parent who needs that access to live their life with dignity." Richardson nodded vigorously, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief his attorney handed him. "And Mr. Richardson," Judge Caprio added, "I want you to bring Emma with you when you come back in 30 days. I'd like to meet the little girl who's going to teach her father what real strength looks like." The transformation was complete. The proud businessman had been replaced by a humbled father. As the hearing concluded, Richardson approached the bench hesitantly. "Your Honor, may I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know? How did you know that this was what I needed to hear?" Judge Caprio's eyes twinkled with the wisdom of someone who had spent decades understanding human nature. "Because, Mr. Richardson, every person who walks into this courtroom is somebody's child. My job isn't just to enforce the law, it's to help people become better versions of themselves." What happened in the weeks that followed would prove that Judge Caprio's unconventional approach had worked better than any traditional punishment ever could. Richardson left the courtroom that day a changed man. Instead of returning to his office, he drove straight to Emma's school and picked her up early. They spent the afternoon together, really talking for the first time in months. That evening, Richardson called an emergency meeting with his building management team. By the end of the week, 4 new handicapped parking spaces had been installed, twice what Judge Caprio had ordered. The sign didn't just read, "Reserved for Emma and friends." It read, "Reserved for Emma and friends, every person deserves dignity and access." But the real change went deeper than parking spaces. Richardson began volunteering with local disability advocacy groups. He started a foundation in Emma's name that provided accessibility modifications for low-income families with disabled children. Comment below if you think Judge Caprio's approach was more effective than traditional punishment, because what happened when Richardson returned to court will restore your faith in the justice system. 30 days later, Richardson returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom. But this time, he wasn't alone. Emma sat beside him in her wheelchair, wearing her favorite purple dress and a bright smile. When Judge Caprio called their case, Richardson stood up with his daughter beside him. "Your Honor," Richardson began, his voice steady but emotional, "30 days ago, you asked me what kind of father and what kind of man I wanted to be. I've learned that the answer isn't about the money I make or the power I have. It's about the world I'm creating for Emma and kids like her." Judge Caprio leaned forward, clearly moved by the transformation he was witnessing. "Emma," Richardson continued, looking down at his daughter, "taught me that strength isn't about taking what you want. It's about making sure everyone has what they need." Emma looked up at her father with pride and then spoke directly to Judge Caprio. "Judge Caprio, my daddy learned that rules are there to help people like me. And now he helps other kids too." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Judge Caprio stood up and walked around his bench to kneel down to Emma's level. "Emma, your father is very lucky to have such a wise teacher." He then looked up at Richardson. "Mr. Richardson, charges dismissed. But more importantly, case closed on becoming the father Emma deserves." As they left the courtroom that day, Richardson paused at the door and turned back to Judge Caprio. "Your Honor, thank you for not giving me what I deserved. Thank you for giving me what I needed." The video of this hearing went viral within hours, garnering millions of views and changing how people thought about justice, leadership, and the power of compassion. Comments poured in from around the world. "This is what real justice looks like." Judge Caprio didn't just enforce the law, he enforced humanity. Richardson learned more in that courtroom than he did in any boardroom. But perhaps the most meaningful comment came from Emma herself, who posted on her father's social media account, "My daddy learned that being strong means helping people who need help. Judge Caprio taught him that. Now daddy teaches other people too." The lesson from that Providence courtroom spread far beyond Rhode Island. Other judges began adopting, Caprio-style, sentences that focused on education and empathy rather than just punishment. Law schools started teaching courses on restorative justice, using this case as a primary example. Richardson's company became a model for corporate disability inclusion, winning national awards for accessibility and employment practices for people with disabilities. Share this video if you believe justice should be about healing and growth, not just punishment, because Judge Caprio proved that sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is show mercy combined with wisdom. 5 years later, Richardson and Emma returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom, not as defendants, but as guests of honor. They were there to present the judge with the first annual Emma Richardson Award for Compassionate Justice. In his acceptance speech, Judge Caprio said something that captured the essence of what had happened in that courtroom years earlier. Real leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about having the wisdom to help people find the power within themselves to become better. Mr. Richardson didn't need punishment, he needed perspective. Emma didn't need her father to be perfect, she needed him to be present and caring. And that's exactly what happened when one judge chose compassion over condemnation, and one father chose growth over pride. The exact moment Frank Caprio left that proud businessman speechless wasn't just about parking violations or legal consequences. It was about the transformative power of leadership that sees beyond the surface to the human being underneath. In a world where justice often feels cold and mechanical, Judge Caprio proved that the most powerful verdicts are the ones that heal hearts and change lives. And sometimes, that means leaving someone speechless, not from fear or anger, but from the overwhelming recognition of grace they never expected to receive. But the ripple effects of that day in Providence Municipal Court would extend far beyond one family's transformation. Within months of the video going viral, Judge Caprio began receiving letters from around the world. Parents of disabled children wrote to thank him for showing their communities what true advocacy looked like. Business leaders shared stories of how they had changed their company policies after watching Richardson's transformation. Meanwhile, Richardson's personal transformation was creating waves in the business community. At the annual Rhode Island Business Leaders Summit, Richardson was asked to speak about corporate social responsibility. His presentation, "What My Daughter Taught Me About Leadership," received a standing ovation. "I used to measure success by quarterly profits," Richardson told the audience. "Now I measure it by how many barriers we remove for people like Emma." Real leadership isn't about accumulating power, it's about using whatever power you have to lift others up. In Providence, the local impact was equally profound. The City Council passed the Emma Richardson Accessibility Act, requiring all new commercial buildings to exceed federal accessibility standards. Emma, now 10 years old, had become something of a local celebrity, starting a YouTube channel called Emma's World, where she explained different types of disabilities to other children. The academic community took notice of what was happening in Providence. Yale Law School created the Caprio Fellowship in Compassionate Justice, a scholarship program for law students committed to restorative justice practices. The first fellow went on to establish similar programs in family courts throughout New England, showing 73% lower recidivism rates compared to traditional sentencing. But perhaps the most significant development was happening in other courtrooms across America. Judges from California to New York began implementing what the legal community dubbed the Providence Method. They started taking time to understand the full context of people's lives before rendering decisions. Judge Maria Rodriguez in Los Angeles became known for her Richardson moment, helping a young mother charged with shoplifting realize that pride was preventing her from accessing assistance programs. Instead of jail time, the mother received connections to social services. 6 months later, she returned to court to show Judge Rodriguez her nursing school acceptance letter. Back in Rhode Island, Emma was growing up in a world her father's transformation had helped create. For her 13th birthday, Emma organized Empathy Day at her school, an event where every student experienced different types of disabilities. The event was so successful that the state education department made it mandatory for all Rhode Island schools. But Emma's proudest moment came when she received an unexpected invitation. The White House asked Emma to speak at a national conference on disability rights. At 14, she would be the youngest speaker in the event's history. Standing at the podium, with her father and Judge Caprio watching proudly, Emma delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. "Judge Caprio didn't just change my daddy's parking habits. He changed my daddy's heart. And when you change one person's heart, you change how they treat everyone they meet." 10 years after that first hearing, Judge Caprio was preparing for retirement. He organized the Richardson Reunion, bringing together all the people whose lives had been touched by that one courtroom moment. Richardson and Emma were there, along with dozens of other defendants who had received similar compassionate treatment. When I spoke to Mr. Richardson that day, Judge Caprio told the crowd, "I wasn't trying to create a movement. I was just trying to help a father see his daughter more clearly." But that's the thing about compassion, it's contagious. Richardson took the podium to offer his own reflection. 10 years ago, I walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom as one kind of man and walked out as a completely different person. Judge Caprio didn't just show me mercy that day, he showed me how to show mercy to others. As Judge Caprio's retirement ceremony concluded, Emma had one final surprise. But the most meaningful part of the ceremony was Emma's final words to her old friend, "Judge Caprio, you taught my daddy that rules are important. But you taught me something even more important, that people are more important than rules. Thank you for seeing my daddy's heart when he couldn't see it himself." The legacy of that one moment in court had become something extraordinary. What started as a simple parking violation case had evolved into a movement toward restorative justice. Law schools taught courses based on the case. Social workers used similar principles in family intervention. Corporate trainers incorporated empathy models into leadership development. The exact moment Frank Caprio left that proud businessman speechless had become the moment when countless people learned that the most powerful thing you can do is combine authority with compassion, justice with understanding, and consequences with hope for redemption.